Okay, this is one of the first videos that I'm going to make on the topic of non-duality. And because of the confusing, maybe nature of it, the seemingly complex nature of it, we're going to begin gently, softly, but directly with the concept of identification. Now, identification is your sense of self. We are born into the world, or at least quickly develop a sense of separateness, a sense of identity, which is based in kind of a paradoxical process of thinking that we are our experiences. Our experiences affect us, right, and shape us. This idea of, say, nurture or nature, where you are essentially a product of your environment or a product of your genetics. Now, we'll see later on why you are not a product of your genetics or a product of your environment, and that thinking of ourselves in this way is inherently limiting and inherently incorrect, and sort of defeats the purpose of life, the process of life. But to begin with, your sense of identity, your sense of self is based in this fundamental confusion that I am my experiences, and therefore I need to control my experiences. So much of our life is based in not working on ourselves, not developing ourselves, but instead trying to control everything that might affect us. And so we'll return to this idea again in a moment. But coming back to the sort of twofold nature, the two problems that identification causes. The first is that it creates a sense of self that is separate from the world. Now that also creates a sense of others as being separate, and everything else is being separate from me. As soon as I think that I'm separate from the totality of existence, from the universal expression of aliveness, of all that is, it also creates separation of that, so that not only am I separate, but something else is separate from me, and the world quickly becomes an environment of separateness, of everything holding this kind of separateness. And our attempts at resolution, our attempts at trying to understand and connect, entrench us in that sense of separateness, where if we only break things down enough, if we only see and divide universal laws enough and understand the most fundamental aspects of things, that somehow we'll understand the totality of existence. You can sort of hear my sarcasm in this, of how this can never work. We can never subdivide our understanding and also have an understanding of the totality. And this is ultimately one reason why both exist. It's because neither perspective of everything being separate and distinct and operating in some self-identified way, it can be complete. And also in completeness, there is no differentiation. Their meaning is lost. So in the expression of everything, we might say that there's no meaning. It's nothingness appearing as everything. But in the subjective, identified state, in separateness, we can see that cause and effect and time and a multitude of meanings and transactions can also permeate everything. So these are the two problems that identification sort of brings up. It brings up a sense of self, and it also brings up a sense of everything else as being separate. And we spend most of our lives then, through religion, through spiritual practices, through the process of life itself, trying to reunify, trying to reconnect. But if we don't correct this fundamental misperception that I am separate, it will never reunify, and your efforts will be in vain. So the reason that this exists, though, is so why does everyone self-identify? Why is identification such a common form of relating? It's such a common form of relating because it's so simple. It's sort of the first ignorance or the first confusion. If we look at different forms of relating, and this is somewhat arbitrary, but you might say that the first, most fundamental way of relating is to identify with something, to simply think I am it. The second form of relating might be something along the lines of transactionalism, where we relate to things in a very transactional, methodical, rigid sort of way, where it's, I'll do some work for you if you pay me a certain amount of money. It really has nothing to do with our inherent being or the nature of us in totality. It's this very constrained form of interaction, relating, that's only based on the transaction at hand. The next form of relating is likely role-based, where I adopt a role, I assume a role, and I relate to you as some other figure, some other role-based character. And so as a father, I might relate to someone as a son, or if I'm married, I might relate to somebody as a spouse. I'm a student, I might relate to someone as a teacher, so on and so forth. You can see that this is still a very limited form of relating. If I'm relating to a teacher as a student, I'm not being my full self. Parts of me are taken off of the table, even if I'm starting with a self-identified, constricted sense of being, right? So how constricted is identity? How constricted is a sense of self? Well, it's so constricted that it's separate. It almost can't be any more distinct or isolated, right? It's so condensed, so constricted that it's perceived as separate. And so this follows us along this, whether it's transactional or role-based forms of relating. The next level of relating is maybe an amalgamated form of relating where we may be a little bit identified, we may be operating transactionally, we may also assume roles, and this may also include sort of an intrusion or inclusion of some transcendent relating where we realize that we're none of these things, but we can operate within these different modes of relating. So this leads us to, and this is where most of humanity operates, right? We engage transactionally, we all assume certain roles, we're all self-identified, and yet we may have a sense that there is more to us and more to life than we are perceiving. The final stage or a final stage is transcendent relating. And this is where we really are not bound by a sense of self that is defined by past identifications of experience. You're not limited to transactionalism or playing a role. You are free to, I was going to say embody, but it extends beyond embodiment, right? The encapsulation or constraint of even identifying with a body and simply being embodied. You're able to radiate and permeate beyond this boundary. And I don't mean this metaphorically. I mean that, while you may see responsibility in tending to your body, you see your body and your embodiment as a tool, and that it's impermanent. And the freer that you are to use it, the more purposeful at times your existence can be. So these forms of relating sort of show a progression, and we begin with identification, with that fundamental confusion. So why do we do this, though? Why is this such a natural and inherent quality or almost inescapable aspect of our existence? It points you in the right direction, but it also misleads you. So it points you in the direction of what life asks of us. So what I mean by that is you exist and life exists. Part of the purpose and function of life is to grow, adapt, evolve, to become more capable. And how is it going to do that if we begin life from a nonchalant, disengaged, decoupled sort of approach to it? So life is not trying to foster dissociation. It's not trying to foster apathy. Human beings had better get their act together. We had better learn how to self-master. We had better start taking better care of our bodies and the environment and take this work more seriously. We can do that, however, without identification, without ownership, without a sense of belongingness. We can do it simply because life asks of it, and it is the fulfillment of life. It is the ultimate embodiment of life to consciously engage with it without having to be forced into imprisonment by it, where it is us and we are it, right? So it is true that things affect you and you have a brain. In fact, you're born into the world with a disposition. One of the things as a psychologist I often, laugh at, that we're born into the world and we're sort of a blank slate. You are not born into this world with a blank slate. You are your parents' child, and they have dispositions and genetics and characteristics and traits and features and maybe disorders that you are very likely to inherit and to have as your own work to tackle and engage in this life. So life is compelling us to do this work, to better ourselves, to become more skillful. And so we're born into the world, or at least that transition happens fairly rapidly, where I think actually what happens is we're born into this world pretty undifferentiated and do not have a sense of self. And because of experience and because of our confused state of being when we're infants, almost immediately that identification begins to take root. So this identification is in some ways leading us, guiding us, directing us to understand one of the most important components of life, which is to develop ourselves. It's to take it and run with it and make something of it. And so this works for a time, but over time, you begin to see the limitations of this form of relating. You begin to see the impermanent nature of life. This approach to life, while necessary, you begin to see its limitations as you begin to understand the nature of existence itself and the nature of your own existence. And so the work of decoupling from our experiences, of being able to flow freely with what life is asking, and to be able to relate to experiences as experiences instead of identification, begins to open up, and the protective covering or pathway of life, once we are more capable and have done some work on ourselves, once we have skill, then more options are available to us. And life can become much freer than the collapsed state of simply being identified with what has happened to you or what might happen to you. So this is a very brief introduction into what could be a pretty complicated conversation around identity and its purpose and its nature, and also ultimately how this leads to a more unified view of everything, of the totality of existence. So let's stop this video there. Happy to answer any questions and steer this in any direction that might be useful for you. Please leave any questions or comments below. And if you like these types of videos, please like and subscribe, and I will see you at the next one.